June Kim stood nervously in the Grand Silurian Diplomatic Hall, his human uniform feeling suddenly tight around his collar. The ceiling soared high above, capturing the pink light of the twin suns that filtered through crystalline windows. As Earth's junior diplomat, he'd been briefed extensively on Silurian customs, but clearly not extensively enough. Remember, Ambassador Park had told him that morning, this is a routine meeting. Just follow protocol and observe. June had nodded confidently then. Now, surrounded by tall, elegant aliens with their iridescent skin and formal ceremonial robes, his confidence had evaporated. The Excelarians moved with fluid grace around the hall, their four eyes, two large ones at normal height, and two smaller ones above their high cheekbones, taking in everything. Ambassador Park, the Excelarian High Representative Ta said, his voice melodic yet formal. We welcome Earth's delegation to Excellaria Prime. The honor is ours, Park replied with a perfect bow. Not too deep, not too shallow. June tried to memorize the exact angle for future reference. This was his first off-world diplomatic assignment, and he was determined not to mess it up. High Representative Ta gestured to a slender Excelarian female standing beside him. May I present Mina, our lead xenobiologist and cultural liaison. She will be your primary contact during your stay. Mina stepped forward, her movements like water flowing over smooth stones. Her skin had a subtle blue-green shimmer that caught the light as she moved. Unlike the other Excelarians who kept all four eyes moving independently, Mina focused all her attention directly on June. It is a pleasure to meet Earth's representatives, she said in perfect English. Her voice had a musical quality that made June think of wind chimes. Park bowed again. The pleasure is ours. June, wanting to show initiative, stepped forward with his hand extended, the way he'd been taught to greet important officials back on Earth. I'm June Kim, Junior Diplomatic Attaché. I look forward to learning about your world. He looked directly into Mina's large primary eyes as he extended his hand, giving what he thought was a friendly smile. The reaction was immediate and bewildering. Mina's four eyes widened simultaneously. Something June would later learn was extremely rare among Silurians. Her iridescent skin flushed a deep purple, and she seemed frozen in place. Around them, the diplomatic hall fell completely silent. Several Silurians gasped. One dropped a crystalline cup, which shattered on the floor with a musical tinkle that echoed in the sudden quiet. High Representative Tay's skin paled to an almost translucent white. The other Excelarians stepped back, creating a circle around June and Mina. What did I just do? June whispered to Ambassador Park, his hand still awkwardly extended in midair. Park grabbed his wrist and gently but firmly pushed his arm down. That hand gesture combined with direct eye contact. In their culture, you just initiated a lifelong mating claim. June felt the blood drain from his face as he looked back at Mina, whose expression shifted between confusion and something he couldn't quite read. Was it horror, curiosity, amusement? But I was just saying hello, June managed to stammer, his voice barely audible. Park whispered urgently, don't say anything else. Let me handle this. But before Park could speak, High Representative Ta had stepped forward, his tall frame now rigid with formality. Ambassador Park, your junior diplomat has made a very unexpected gesture toward one of our most respected scientists. Park bowed deeply, much deeper than before. High Representative, please accept our sincere apologies. Junior diplomat Kim is newly arrived and was attempting a traditional Earth greeting. He had no understanding of the significance of his actions in your culture. The assembled Silurians began murmuring among themselves, the sound like rustling leaves in a gentle breeze. Mina finally moved, her four eyes blinking in an unsynchronized pattern. High Representative, she said in the Silurian language, which June's translator rendered in his earpiece, it is clear the human did not understand our customs. Tay responded in the same language. Understanding or not, the claim was witnessed by the full diplomatic corps. You know our traditions, Mina. Once claimed, always bound. June wanted to disappear through the floor. His first diplomatic function, and he had somehow proposed marriage, or whatever the Xylarian equivalent was, to an alien scientist he'd just met. His career was over before it had properly begun. "Perhaps," said an older female Xylarian who stepped forward from the group, "we should discuss this matter in private, rather than in front of the entire assembly." Ta nodded stiffly. "Council Elder Jin speaks wisely. Ambassador Park, would you and your enthusiastic young diplomat join us in the Chamber of Resolution?" Park bowed again. "Of course, High Representative." As they followed the Xylarian officials through a series of crystalline corridors, Jun whispered to Park, "I'm so sorry, Ambassador. I had no idea." "Not now," Park hissed. "And whatever you do, don't make any more gestures toward any Xylarians. Keep your hands at your sides and your eyes lowered until we figure this out." The Chamber of Resolution was smaller but no less impressive than the main hall. The walls seemed to be made of living crystal that pulsed with gentle light. A circular table dominated the center, with high-backed chairs arranged around it. Tai took his place at what appeared to be the head of the table, with Mina seated to his right and Elder Jin to his left. Park was directed to sit opposite Tai, with June beside him. "Now," Ta said once everyone was seated, "let us address this situation." Mina spoke first, her voice calm. "The human clearly did not understand our customs. There can be no binding claim without informed intent." Elder Jin tilted her head. "The ancient codex is clear, Mina. The claim made before witnesses binds both souls regardless of stars or circumstance. Your parents' union began the same way, did it not? Your mother claimed your father during the first contact with the Andromeda species." Mina's skin flushed purple again. "That was different. My mother had studied my father's species for years before making her claim." Tai turned all four eyes to June, who tried not to squirm under the alien's intense gaze. "Human, did you intend to bond with Mina when you performed the claiming gesture?" Park started to answer, but Ta held up a long-fingered hand. "I asked the claimant directly, Ambassador." June swallowed hard. "No, sir. On Earth, extending a hand is a greeting between equals. It signifies peaceful intentions and respect. I was trying to show respect to Mina as our cultural liaison." "Interesting," Elder Jin murmured. "So in your culture, this gesture is one of respect rather than intimate bonding." "Yes, exactly," Jum said, relief washing through him. "We call it a handshake. It's completely non-romantic." Tai and Jin exchanged looks with their upper eyes while keeping their lower eyes on June. A disconcerting sight for humans, not used to Xylarian facial expressions. "Nevertheless," Ta said finally, "the claim was made according to our customs, on our world, and witnessed by the entire diplomatic court. This creates a serious cultural and biological dilemma." "Biological?" June asked, his voice cracking slightly. Mina looked at him directly, all four eyes focused on his face. "My species allows only one mate in a lifetime." Jum Kim. "When a claim is made and accepted, biological changes begin in both partners. These changes are irreversible." June felt lightheaded. "But I didn't know. And you didn't accept anything, did you?" "In our culture, silence after a claim is acceptance," Elder Jin explained. "Mina did not reject your claim, which by our traditions means she has accepted." Ambassador Park cleared his throat. "Surely there must be some protocol for misunderstandings between species. This cannot be the first cultural confusion in your history of interstellar relations." Tai's upper eyes narrowed. "There are precedents, but none precisely like this. We will need to consult the full council." As the Xylarians began discussing legal technicalities in their own language, June caught Mina looking at him. Unlike the others, whose expressions showed concern or displeasure, Mina's face held something else. Curiosity, perhaps even a hint of amusement. When their eyes met, she didn't look away. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, and the corners of her mouth turned up in what June thought might be a smile. And despite the diplomatic disaster unfolding around him, despite his certain dismissal from the diplomatic court, despite accidentally binding himself to an alien woman he'd just met, June found himself smiling back. 3 hours after the diplomatic incident, June sat in a private meeting chamber, his head throbbing. The walls were made of the same living crystal as the rest of the Solarian government complex, pulsing with soft blue light that seemed to match his increasing heartbeat. Ambassador Park had been called away to speak with Earth's Central Command, leaving June alone with the Solarians. Across the oval table sat Mina, who appeared much calmer than she had in the main hall. Next to her was Council Leader Q, an older Solarian with skin that had faded to a pale silver with age. His 4 eyes seemed to move independently, constantly scanning the room while somehow maintaining focus on June. "You don't understand," Mina explained, her voice gentle but firm. "My species forms one bond. For life. The neurochemical changes are permanent and irreversible." June ran his hands through his hair, a nervous habit from childhood. "On Earth, we shake hands as a greeting. I had no idea it meant this." Q tapped his long, slender fingers against the crystal table. Each tap sent small ripples of light across the surface. "Irrelevant. The claim has been witnessed. To reject it now would cause Mina severe psychological damage and dishonor both our species." "What if we just explained it was a mistake?" June asked desperately. The room felt too warm, too small. His diplomatic training hadn't prepared him for accidentally becoming engaged to an alien. "Our biology doesn't recognize mistakes," Mina said softly. "Once claimed, we are bonded." Q leaned forward. "Allow me to explain, human. When a Solarian accepts a mating claim, a biological process begins immediately. Special glands near our hearts release bonding hormones that permanently alter our brain chemistry. These changes make us physically and emotionally attuned to our mate. But we're different species," June protested. "Surely there can't be any actual biological effect between us." Mina exchanged a look with Q that June couldn't interpret. She touched her chest lightly. "The hormones have already been released in my system. Whether or not they affect you is irrelevant. My biology has begun the process." "What exactly does this process do?" June asked, trying to understand the gravity of the situation. Mina's 4 eyes focused on him, unblinking. "My emotional patterns are now chemically linking to yours. Over the next few weeks, I will become increasingly attuned to your emotional state. I will sense your feelings across distances. My body is preparing for a lifelong partnership." June felt cold sweat forming on his forehead. "And if we break this bond?" Q's upper eyes narrowed. "The results would be unpleasant. Bonded Solarians who lose their mates often fall into deep depression. Some waste away entirely. Others experience physical symptoms, pain, illness, organ failure. Our historical records show several cases of death following broken bonds." "Death," June whispered. "Not always," Mina added quickly. "But the psychological damage is guaranteed." June looked at Mina more carefully. She was beautiful, in an alien way, her iridescent skin catching the light, her graceful movements, her eyes that seemed to see more than human eyes could. Under any other circumstances, he might have been intrigued to know her better. But not like this. Not with her life potentially at stake. "There must be some solution," he said finally. "Some way to reverse the process, or make an exception." A young Solarian aide entered the room, bowing low before approaching Q. He whispered something in the council leader's ear, then quickly departed. "Your Ambassador Park has contacted your Earth government," Q announced. "They have requested a full biological analysis of this situation and potential solutions. They are sending a xenobiologist on the next transport." "How long will that take?" June asked. 3 Earth weeks, Q replied. "Until then, you must remain on Solaria Prime." Mina stood up gracefully. "Perhaps I should show June our research facilities. He might better understand our biology if he sees our medical technology." Hugh nodded his approval, and June followed Minna through a series of corridors, trying to memorize the route, but quickly becoming lost in the crystalline maze of the government complex. "I'm sorry about this," June said as they walked. "I've ruined your life with a simple misunderstanding." Mina's upper eyes blinked while her lower ones remained fixed on the path ahead. "You've certainly made it more interesting." There was a hint of humor in her voice that surprised him. "You're not angry?" he asked. "Would anger solve anything?" She stopped walking and turned to face him fully. "I am a scientist, June. I study problems and find solutions. This is simply a more personal problem than most." They entered a large laboratory filled with equipment June couldn't identify. Screens displayed what looked like cellular structures and brain scans. One wall was lined with transparent containers holding various liquids in rainbow hues. Mina walked to a station and pressed her palm against a screen. It lit up with her biological data. At least, that's what June assumed it was. Strange patterns and Silurian writing appeared. "This is my current hormonal state," she explained. "See these markers?" She pointed to glowing purple dots scattered throughout the display. "These are bonding hormones, now actively rewriting certain neural pathways in my brain." June stepped closer, fascinated despite his guilt. "Does it hurt?" "No. It creates a sense of connection, rightness." She paused. "It's difficult to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it." "On Earth, we choose our partners," June said. "Sometimes we choose badly and separate. Sometimes we choose well and stay together for life. But it's always a choice, not a biological imperative." Minna tilted her head. "That sounds chaotic." "It is," June admitted with a small laugh. "But it's also freeing. We can love many times in different ways." "Love," Minna repeated the word carefully. "Your language has many words for emotional bonds. We have one word that encompasses all such connections: Taven. It means both the emotion and the biological state." She led him to another station where a different screen displayed what looked like historical artwork, Silurians in various poses and situations. "Our ancestors believed the bonding process was sacred," she explained. "That the great cosmos itself determined who should bond with whom by guiding their movements at the perfect moment. So in a way, I've been cosmic mesh with you?" June asked, trying to lighten the mood. Mina's skin rippled with a faint blue pattern. What June would later learn was the Silurian equivalent of a blush. "Some traditionalists might see it that way," she admitted, "which is why this situation is so complicated. Half our council views this as a sacred bond that cannot be broken. The others see it as a diplomatic incident that requires a scientific solution." "And what do you see it as?" June asked quietly. Minna was silent for a moment, all four eyes focused on him with unsettling intensity. "An opportunity," she finally said. "Humans and Silurians have never bonded before. This could provide invaluable research data." June couldn't help but smile. "I'm a science experiment to you. Aren't I one to you as well?" She countered, her mouth forming what might have been a smile. "The alien who got accidentally engaged to you." Before June could respond, his communicator buzzed. Ambassador Park's voice came through, tense and formal. "June, return to the human quarters immediately. We need to discuss options." Minna nodded. "Go. Your people will want to protect you." "It's understandable." As June turned to leave, he hesitated. "Will you be okay? With the hormones and everything?" "For now, yes," she said. "The early stages are manageable." "But June," her voice grew more serious, "don't make promises to fix this if you're not certain you can. For my people, a broken bond is worse than no bond at all." June looked at this alien woman who was now biologically connecting to him against both their wills. Despite everything, he felt a strange responsibility toward her. "I won't make promises," he said, "but I won't run away from this either." As he left the lab and headed back toward the human quarters, June realized that for better or worse, his life had become intertwined with Mina's. And despite the chaos of the situation, part of him was curious to see where this accidental bond might lead. The Xilarian High Council chamber was intimidating. 12 senior Xilarians sat in a semicircle on raised seats, their 4 eyes all focused intently on June. He stood in the center of the room, acutely aware that he was the only human present. Ambassador Park had been denied entry. This matter concerned a mating claim. The council had explained, and only the involved parties could speak. Mina stood to his left, her posture perfect, but her iridescent skin showing subtle color changes that June had learned indicated anxiety. 3 days had passed since the accidental claim, and the situation had escalated to the highest levels of Xilarian government. The human diplomat has triggered a mating bond with scientist Mina. Council leader Q announced to the chamber, "We must determine how to proceed." An elderly Xilarian with pale silver skin spoke first. "The ancient laws are clear. A claim witnessed cannot be undone." "But he is not Xilarian," argued another council member. "Our biological imperatives cannot apply to his species." "Yet they clearly apply to Mina," countered a third. "Scans confirm her bonding process has begun." June listened to them debate his fate, and Mina's, feeling increasingly helpless. The Earth Xenobiology team was still weeks away. Ambassador Park had suggested June return to Earth immediately, but the Xilarians had politely but firmly refused to allow him to leave. As the council's debate grew more heated, June suddenly felt a surge of determination. He stepped forward. "If I may speak," he said, his voice echoing in the crystal chamber. The council fell silent, 12 pairs of upper eyes and 12 pairs of lower eyes all turning to him. "Perhaps we compromise," Jum suggested to the assembled council. "A cultural exchange period. Mina and I learn about each other without formalizing anything yet." The council members exchanged glances. Q's upper eyes narrowed while his lower ones remained fixed on June. "Explain your proposal," Q said. June took a deep breath. "I suggest a middle path. I won't leave Xilarea and abandon Mina while her bonding process is active. Instead, we spend time together, learning about each other's cultures, worlds, and ways of thinking. This gives your scientists time to study our situation, and Earth's xenobiologists time to arrive and help." "And at the end of this period?" asked a female council member. "At the end, we make an informed decision about how to proceed," Jum said, carefully avoiding any firm commitments. "Rather than rushing into something neither of us understood when it happened." The council chamber filled with the soft murmuring of Xilarian voices conferring. June glanced at Mina, who gave him the slight head tilt he now recognized as a sign of approval. Finally, Q spoke. "Unprecedented, but perhaps the only path forward without diplomatic incident. The council will allow this cultural exchange period for 40 days. During this time, Mina's health will be closely monitored. If her condition deteriorates due to bond instability, other measures will be considered." Relief washed over June. He had bought them time. "Thank you, council leader," he said with a respectful bow. As they left the chamber, Mina walked beside him, her steps light. "Clever solution," she said quietly. "Though I suspect you have no intention of formalizing our bond when the 40 days end." June looked at her in surprise. "I thought you'd be relieved. This gives us time to find a way to reverse your bonding process." Mina's upper eyes blinked in a pattern June couldn't interpret. "Perhaps, or perhaps we'll discover something unexpected." The cultural exchange began awkwardly. Their first official meeting was in a Xilarian botanical garden, where crystal plants grew in formations that captured and refracted the light of the twin suns. "I thought this might be a neutral location," Mina explained. "Neither my laboratory nor your diplomatic quarters." June nodded, grateful for her thoughtfulness. "It's beautiful here." They walked in silence for several minutes, the tension between them palpable. Finally, June spoke. "I've been researching Xilarian culture, but there's only so much in our databases. Would you tell me more about your people? Not just the bonding, but everything." Mina seemed to relax. What would you like to know? Start with something simple. What do Xilarians do for enjoyment? Over the following weeks, their initially stiff meetings transformed into genuine cultural exchanges. June introduced Mina to human music. She particularly enjoyed classical piano, saying the mathematical precision reminded her of Xilarian harmonics, but with an emotional quality her people's music lacked. This composer, Chopin, she said one day as they sat in June's quarters listening to a nocturne. He understood mathematics without realizing it. The patterns are perfect. In return, she showed him Xilarian light sculpture art that responded to emotional frequencies. In a special gallery, she placed a sensor on his temple, then asked him to focus on different emotions. As his feelings changed, the crystal sculptures around them shifted colors and shapes, creating displays unique to his emotional patterns. That's incredible. June breathed as a happy memory of his childhood transformed a sculpture into a spiraling rainbow. Do all Xilarians have this connection to the crystals? Yes, but each of us creates different patterns, she explained. It's how we express ourselves. They explored Xilarian cuisine, mostly liquid nutrients with complex molecular structures. Human films. Mina was fascinated by romantic comedies, finding their premises completely baffling, and the fundamentals of their different technologies. As the days passed, Jun found himself looking forward to their meetings. Mina was brilliant, curious, and had a subtle sense of humor that emerged once she became comfortable with him. She asked insightful questions about human relationships, politics, and beliefs, never judging but always analyzing. Your species is so contradictory, she told him one day as they shared a meal. You create art about eternal love while designing legal systems for when relationships fail. You speak of peace while preparing for war. How do you reconcile these opposites? We don't, usually, June admitted. Humans contain contradictions. It's part of what makes us human. 3 weeks into their cultural exchange, they had developed a comfortable routine. Mornings were spent in Mina's laboratory, where she continued her research while explaining Xilarian science to June. Afternoons were cultural excursions. June had arranged for Earth media and artifacts to be sent on diplomatic channels. Evenings were often spent watching the spectacular Xilarian sunsets from a crystal observation deck. It was during one such evening as they watched the twin moons rise over the crystalline landscape that Mina asked the question that had clearly been on her mind. Humans are strange, she told him as they sat side by side. You form multiple connections throughout your lives. Doesn't that dilute their meaning? June smiled, considering his answer carefully. Maybe. Or maybe it expands our capacity for understanding. Explain, she prompted, all 4 eyes focused on him with genuine curiosity. Each person we connect with shows us a different facet of ourselves, Jun said, watching the moons cast dual shadows across the crystal plains below. Each relationship teaches us something new about love, friendship, compromise. When a relationship ends, we carry those lessons forward. Mina was quiet for a long moment. That's beautiful, in its way. Different from our singular devotion, but beautiful. What about friendship? June asked. Do Xilarians form many friendships throughout life? Yes, of course. But friendship has different biochemistry than mating bonds. Friends don't trigger the permanent changes. June turned to look at her directly. So what would we be in your culture if not for the accidental claim? Friends? Colleagues? Mina's skin rippled with blue patterns, the Xilarian blush he'd come to recognize. I would have found you an interesting study subject, she admitted, a representative of a species so different from my own. Perhaps in time, a friend. And now, June asked softly, now you are my unintended bondmate, and I am learning to adjust to that reality, she said simply. Our scientists have found no way to reverse the bonding process once begun. June felt a wave of guilt. I'm sorry, Mina. Don't be, she said, surprising him. These weeks have been illuminating. You are different from what I expected a human to be. Is that good or bad? he asked with a small smile. Simply different, she replied, but her upper eyes crinkled in what he now recognized as a Silurian smile. Perhaps our cultures can learn from each other, just as we are learning. As they sat watching the moons, Jun realized that despite the circumstances, he had come to genuinely care for Mina. Not as a mate, perhaps, but as someone whose mind and perspective fascinated him. Whether that would be enough to resolve their situation, he didn't know. But for now, in this moment of twin moonlight and shared understanding, it felt like a beginning rather than the accident it had been. The science pavilion gleamed in the morning light, its crystal walls capturing and amplifying the red-orange glow of the rising sun. Inside, Silurians and a small group of humans gathered for the first joint scientific presentation since Earth and Sileria had established diplomatic relations. For June, this moment represented more than just science. It was the culmination of 32 days of cultural exchange with Mina. "Are you nervous?" Mina asked as they prepared their presentation materials. The data crystals in her hands caught the light, sending tiny rainbows dancing across her blue-green skin. "A little," June admitted. "This is the first time both our species will see what we've been working on." Their research had started as a way to pass the time during their cultural exchange period, but had quickly evolved into something more significant. By studying their own unusual situation, they had discovered new insights into cross-species communication patterns. The data showed that despite vastly different physiologies, certain emotional expressions were universal, or at least translatable. "Your Ambassador Park seems pleased," Mina observed, nodding toward where Park stood conversing with Council Leader Q. "Perhaps this will help your career recover from our incident." June smiled. "Our incident has turned out to be the most interesting diplomatic assignment I could have imagined." The audience settled into their seats, a mix of Silurian scientists with their 4 eyes blinking in anticipation, and the small human delegation from Earth's embassy. At the back of the room, a few Silurians stood apart, their formal traditional robes marking them as members of the conservative heritage group. Silurians who believed in maintaining the purity of their ancient customs. June noticed Mina's upper eyes track their movement while her lower eyes remained focused on the presentation setup. "They don't approve of our research," she explained quietly, noting his attention. "They believe the bonding process is sacred and shouldn't be studied scientifically, especially not with off-worlders." Council Leader Q stepped forward to introduce them. "Today marks a historic collaboration between our worlds. Scientist Mina and diplomat June will present their findings on cross-species communication pathways." Mina began, her melodic voice carrying easily through the crystal acoustics of the pavilion. The screens behind her displayed comparative brain scans, Silurian and human, highlighting similarities in emotional processing centers. "While our physiologies differ significantly," she explained, "our research suggests that emotions create similar neural patterns across species. This could revolutionize translation technology, moving beyond mere words to true understanding." June stepped forward for his portion of the presentation. "We've identified 5 universal emotional markers present in both species. These constants could form the foundation for a new type of translator that." A sharp crack interrupted him. At first, June thought one of the crystal display panels had shattered. Then came the deep rumble. The explosion rocked the science pavilion, sending shockwaves through the crystal structure. Cracks spiderwebbed across the ceiling, sending deadly shards raining down on the assembled crowd. "Get down," Mina shouted, pushing June aside with surprising strength. They tumbled to the floor as a massive section of ceiling collapsed where he had been standing seconds before. The room filled with screams and the tinkling sound of shattering crystal. Through the chaos, June saw Mina crouched protectively over him, her face contorted in pain. A large shard of crystalline material had embedded itself in her shoulder. Purple blood seeped through her ceremonial robes, spreading in an alarming stain. "Mina, you're hurt." June tried to examine the wound, but she shook her head. "We need to get everyone out," she said through gritted teeth. The structural integrity is compromised. Security forces rushed in, both Silurian and human, helping evacuate the injured. Ambassador Park appeared through the dust and debris, a cut on his forehead bleeding red against his pale skin. "June, are you hurt?" he called. "I'm fine, but Minna needs medical attention," June replied, supporting her as they moved toward the exit. He could feel her trembling against him, but her face remained composed, her lower eyes scanning constantly for other victims while her upper eyes seemed fixed on something distant, perhaps fighting the pain. The medical facility was chaotic, filled with injured Silurians and humans. Doctors moved efficiently between beds, their 4 eyes allowing them to monitor multiple patients at once. Jun refused to leave Mina's side as the doctors removed the crystal shard from her shoulder. Her purple blood looked almost black under the bright medical lights. "The wound is clean," the doctor told them. "The regenerative treatment will repair the damage within a day." Director Han, the head of Silurian security, entered the medical bay. His normally iridescent skin looked dull with fatigue, and all 4 of his eyes showed signs of stress. "Why would anyone do this?" June asked him, watching Silurian doctors treat Mina's wounds. Director Han looked grim. "Not everyone appreciates what you two represent. Human nationalists and Silurian purists have formed an alliance against interspecies bonds." "An alliance?" Ambassador Park asked, joining them. "Between human and Silurian extremists." "That seems contradictory." "Extremists often find common ground in their hatred," Han replied. "We've been monitoring communications between a human group called Earth First and our own conservative heritage group. They see your accidental bond as a threat to both species' purity." June felt cold anger building inside him. "They attacked a scientific conference because of us." "Because of what you represent," Han corrected. "Your research suggests our species are compatible on fundamental levels. For those who build their identity on separation and superiority, that's a dangerous idea." A medical technician approached, holding a data crystal. "Director, you should see this. The routine neural scans we performed on the injured." Han took the crystal and inserted it into a nearby terminal. The screen filled with comparative scans, Mina's brain on one side, June's on the other. "This can't be right," Han said, his 4 eyes widening as he studied the display. "Run the scan again." The technician shook his head. "We already did, 3 times. The results are consistent." June looked at the screen, not understanding the Silurian medical notations. "What's wrong?" Even more surprising than the attack was what the medical scans revealed. June's neurochemistry was changing, adapting patterns similar to Silurian bonding structures. Specific areas of his brain showed activity patterns that mirrored Mina's. "Impossible," whispered the chief medical officer who had joined them. "Humans aren't supposed to be compatible with our bonding process." Mina struggled to sit up despite her injury. "Show me," she demanded. The medical officer adjusted the display so she could see it from her bed. Her 4 eyes moved rapidly over the data, her scientific training evident in how quickly she processed the information. "The human neuroplasticity," she murmured. "It's adapting to match the bonding patterns." "What does this mean?" June asked, suddenly aware of a strange tingling sensation at the base of his skull. Was it psychosomatic, now that he knew changes were happening? Or had it been there all along, unnoticed? "It means," Council Leader Q said from the doorway, where he had been listening silently, "that the bond is not one-sided as we assumed. Your human brain is forming a connection with Mina's." Ambassador Park looked alarmed. "Is this dangerous for June? These changes weren't supposed to happen in humans." The chief medical officer studied the scans again. "We don't know. This is unprecedented." "I feel fine," June insisted, though the tingling sensation was spreading, becoming a warm pressure behind his eyes. Mina reached out and took his hand. The moment their skin touched, the pressure subsided, replaced by a sense of calm certainty. From Mina's expression, all 4 eyes widening simultaneously, he could tell she felt it too. "The bond is stabilizing," she whispered. "I can feel it." The chief medical officer rushed to take new readings, exclaiming in surprise at what he saw. "The patterns are harmonizing between them. How is this possible?" Director Han looked troubled. "This changes everything. If humans and Solarians can truly bond at a neurological level, then the extremists have even more reason to fear us." Jun finished the thought. "And more reason to try again." Council Leader Q stepped forward. "You too must be protected, not just for your own safety, but for what you represent. This discovery goes beyond a diplomatic incident or a cultural misunderstanding. If human and Solarian minds can truly connect this way, it could change both our worlds," Ambassador Park said quietly. Later that night, in a secure medical room with guards posted outside, Jun sat beside Mina's recovery bed. Her shoulder was healing rapidly under the regenerative treatment, the wound already closing. "Did you know this could happen?" he asked her. "That my brain would change too." Mina's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a Solarian expression of uncertainty. "I considered it theoretically possible. Human neuroplasticity is remarkable. But I never expected it to actually occur." "And now?" Jun asked. "What happens to us?" "Now," she said, her voice soft but certain, "we've become something neither of our worlds has seen before. The first true human-Solarian bonded pair." Jun felt the warm pressure in his mind again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like a presence, Mina's presence, just at the edge of his awareness. "I can feel you," he whispered. "Not your thoughts, but your presence. Is that part of it?" Mina nodded, her skin rippling with patterns of blue and gold, emotions he was beginning to recognize. The awareness grows stronger as the bond matures. For Solarians, it becomes a constant connection, a sharing of emotional states. "And for humans?" Jun asked. "We're about to find out," she replied, her upper eyes crinkling in what he now knew was a smile. 6 weeks after the explosion of the science pavilion, Jun stood at the window of the new research laboratory, watching the twin suns set over the crystal landscape of Solaria. The attack had changed everything, not just for him and Mina, but potentially for both their species. Behind him, Mina sat surrounded by data screens, her 4 eyes moving independently as she analyzed the latest brain scans. Her shoulder had healed completely, leaving only a small purple scar. Since the attack, they had been placed under heavy security, their research now classified at the highest levels. Earth's xenobiology team had arrived 3 days after the explosion and had been working alongside Solarian scientists ever since. What they discovered had stunned both communities. "Look at this," Mina called to him, excitement clear in her voice. Jun turned from the window and joined her at the central display. "What am I seeing?" he asked, studying the complex neural patterns on the screen. "Your brain from yesterday compared to 3 weeks ago," she explained, pointing to specific highlighted areas. "The adaptation continues, but without the harmful effects we would expect. Your species' neuroplasticity is remarkable," explained Mina, now recovered and studying the research data. "Humans can form deep bonds, break them, and form new ones without the damage Solarians would suffer." Jun touched her hand gently. "Does that make us shallow or resilient?" "It makes you adaptive," she replied. "Something my people could learn from." The door slid open as Dr. Lee, the head of Earth's xenobiology team, entered with Chief Medical Officer Ta. Both looked tired but excited. "We've confirmed it," Dr. Lee announced. "The human brain creates temporary neural structures that mimic the Solarian bonding patterns, but these structures can be remodeled without permanent damage." Chief Medical Officer Ta's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. "In theory, this could lead to a treatment for Solarians who lose their bondmates, if we can replicate the human neural flexibility. You could save thousands of lives," Mina finished, her skin rippling with patterns of excitement. Jun felt a mix of emotions, pride in what they'd discovered, concern about what it meant for him and Mina. The bond between them had grown stronger each day. He could sense her emotional states now, a constant warm presence in his mind. When they were separated, he felt a gentle pull, like a compass needle pointing toward her. "What does this mean for us?" he asked the scientists. Dr. Lee and Officer Tad exchanged glances. "That's up to you," Dr. Lee said carefully. "The bond is real, but according to our research, you could break it without suffering the effects a Xylarian would experience." "And Mina?" June asked, already knowing the answer. Officer Tay's upper eyes narrowed. For her, the process would be difficult, not impossible, with new treatments based on your neuroplasticity, but painful and potentially dangerous. June felt Mina's emotions through their bond, a complex mix of fear, hope, and something deeper he couldn't quite name. "There's another option," Ambassador Park said from the doorway. None of them had heard him enter. "One that both governments are cautiously supporting." 2 months later, the great crystal hall of Xylaria was filled with dignitaries from both worlds. The attack had accelerated rather than hindered diplomatic relations, as both governments realized the importance of what June and Mina represented. June stood before a crystal arch that pulsed with living light, wearing a formal Earth diplomatic uniform, modified with elements of Xylarian design. Beside him, Ambassador Park adjusted his collar. "Nervous?" Park asked quietly. "Less than I should be," June admitted. "The bond makes everything feel right." Park nodded. What began as the biggest diplomatic blunder in Earth's history might end up being our greatest achievement. The music changed, a blend of Earth classical piano and Xylarian harmonic crystals. The doors at the far end of the hall opened, and Mina entered. Her ceremonial robes flowed like water, catching and reflecting the light and patterns that seemed to move with her emotions. All 4 of her eyes were focused forward, directly on June. Through their bond, he could feel her joy, her certainty. As she reached him, Council Leader Q stepped forward to begin the ceremony. "We gather today to witness what once seemed impossible, the union of 2 worlds, embodied in the bond between these 2 individuals." When they finally held their bonding ceremony, it combined elements from both worlds. Earth flowers alongside Xylarian light crystals, human vows with Xylarian telepathic sharing. June felt the moment their minds touched more deeply than ever before, a sensation like diving into warm water, surrounded by Mina's presence. The assembled dignitaries watched in awe as the crystal arch above them responded to their bond, shifting into patterns and colors never before seen in Xylarian bonding ceremonies. Blues and golds from Mina's emotions intertwining with new colors that represented June's human feelings. After the ceremony, at the celebration that followed, Ambassador Park addressed the gathered representatives. He stood on a crystal platform, his voice amplified by the natural acoustics of the hall. "What began as a diplomatic incident has evolved into something unprecedented. The human capacity for forming multiple deep connections throughout life may help Xylarians overcome their biological limitations, while we gain insights into the depth of singular devotion." The crowd applauded, humans and Xylarians together. In the 3 months since the accidental claim, the research from June and Mina's bond had already led to promising treatments for Xylarians who had lost their mates. Meanwhile, human scientists were studying the Xylarian bonding process to understand deeper emotional connections. "They're calling it the Adaptive Bond Project," Dr. Lee told June as they stood near the refreshment table. "Your genetic samples and brain scans will help thousands. I never expected to become a medical breakthrough when I took this diplomatic posting," June said with a laugh. "Sometimes the greatest discoveries come from accidents," Dr. Lee replied. Later, as the celebration continued, June and Mina slipped away to a quiet crystal garden. The twin moons cast jewel shadows across the landscape, just as they had on the night they first began to understand each other. "The extremists will still oppose us," Mina said quietly. "Both the Earth First group and our conservative heritage group see our bond as a threat." "They fear change," June replied. "But they can't stop it. Our species are meant to learn from each other. Through their bond, he felt her agreement, her hope for the future. The strength of their connection still surprised him sometimes, the way he could feel her curiosity, her determination, her affection. "I never imagined my diplomatic career would lead to this," he said, gesturing to the crystal plants around them that were responding to their emotional states, creating patterns of light and color. "Nor did I expect that my research would lead to me bonding with an alien," Minna replied, her upper eyes crinkling in a smile while her lower eyes gazed at the responsive crystals. June looked at Mina, seeing all four of her eyes focused entirely on him, feeling the depth of connection between them that transcended their different biologies. "Perhaps," she said quietly, "claiming each other was no accident after all."